All right, I'm back with another tote.
I sped up several video segments in this part 2 to save you some time, but suffice to say, you can see the material is ready to be harvested, along with a lot of worms and cocoons.
You can probably see right there in the camera all the cocoons in Gilligan.
In doing a harvest of this size, I also have to think ahead to the new bedding.
I also have 2 bedding systems waiting for Gilligan. One of them are those large egg carton bits that I pulled out. I'll put the link to that video in the description. I pulled out some of Gilligan's egg cartons that were unfinished already.
When I dug down to the bottom, I found some interesting occupants.
So this is a piece of the bottom of Gilligan, and look at that worm just pressed up against the bottom. Wow. So I'm going to, as I pull out cocoons and worms, I will be moving them to Eat My Shorts, Peekaboo, and the 2 huge bedding totes that I'm preparing for Gilligan. As I said, one of them is his egg cartons that are inoculated already from Gilligan, and the other one contains beautiful leaves that I started about a month and a half ago. I did put some of the overs from Gilligan's other totes. I've already pulled out 3 full totes of castings from Gilligan. More worms pressed to the bottom. So I've already pulled out 3 of these totes from Gilligan, and we've spread them in the garden. And I did pull out the worms and the overs from them and put them in that tote of mine with the maple leaves. And so there are definitely going to be, a good inoculated set of bedding for these worms to go into. And that's important because I don't want the worms escaping when I move them to a new environment. What they're going through right now is traumatic enough. You can see it's a sunny day today. These worms, especially the ones that were hiding on the bottom, they probably don't like being thrust into the daylight like this. And I'm doing this in the broad daylight, and I'll show you a picture in a minute of what these totes look like, because I'm leaving the lids off just to make sure that I don't have a mass escape. There are obviously a lot of worms in these totes, so I can tell you right now that it's going to take me several days. And the reason I want to get the worms out is these are epigeic worms. They live in the compost layers of my garden, and which is great, but that means my garden has to provide them with food. They don't eat if they're just put in soil. Soil doesn't have the organic matter necessarily in it to sustain this large of a population. Oh, that's some of the baiting food right there. Interesting. This large of a population cannot be sustained in just a garden without additional layers of mulch and nitrogen materials, as well as brown materials for the worms specifically. So as you know, if you've watched my channel, I have 4 in-ground worm towers. They're 5 gallons each that we feed kitchen scraps, manure, cardboard, leaves. And so any worms that do end up in my raised beds can travel to those towers. The towers are approximately 6 feet apart in the garden. So if they go in one direction or another, they only have to go 3 feet before they find a tower, approximately. So I know that these worms that end up in my vegetable garden will have plentiful supply of food when they get to a tower. We have mulched our garden with dried leaves. And I was just over there when I was having lunch today. I was sitting by the garden, and I just sort of turned over some of the leaf mulch and my worms from my tower are taking care of that leaf mulch in short order. And I went, whoa, you know, that mulch is going to have to be replenished right now. Look at the little baby worm in the egg carton scrap. Wow. Those egg cartons is what we launched Gilligan with way in the beginning. So I don't want to add, you've seen, oh, that looks like a bit of plastic. You've seen hundreds, there's probably thousands of worms that have gone by in these two totes in Gilligan. I don't want to put thousands of worms into a garden that doesn't have the infrastructure in terms of food for them to support them. It's just not fair. They'll regulate their population for the amount of food availability, and these beautiful worms will no longer be working for me. They'll just, you know, stop breeding, or however they regulate their population. I don't know if they actually die or they just stop breeding is probably the more likely scenario. So I don't want it to come to that. So that's why I want to pull cocoons and I want to pull worms, and that way I can put my worms and the cocoons in places where I choose to have them, I choose to feed them, rather than just let them wild in my garden and say, fend for yourself, you know, every worm for himself in eating up the tower food. This is too many worms for my garden towers. They reproduce on their own. They've got loads of worms in those towers, so I do not need to add thousands more worms to my garden. All right, so I've obviously dug out from underneath this styrofoam tote, and so I'm perilously close to having this second tote tip over. I can tell you right now, this material, given that it was on the bottom, is loads heavier than the first tote I moved. I actually have a cracked or broken rib right now, so there's no way I'm going to be able to move this by myself. So these worms are just going to sit here. Whoa, and there goes the tote right now. Yep, these worms are just going to sit here until Landon can come out and help me move this over to my patio table. In the meantime, I will sneak around the other side and see if I can pull out another tote. I know that seems impractical, but I think even with my rib the way it is, I can lift this up. There we go. These styrofoam totes are very good. I should have put them as part of my accessibility video because they are light enough that the castings are heavy enough that you don't need a heavy container, and these styrofoam totes certainly are not heavy. And see, I can move that even though that is massively heavy with these very moist castings. I hope you can see that at the edge of the frame. All right, so I'm going to move over there and do it again.
This is a huge harvest. That green scoop contains about 500 milliliters or 2 cups, and this is my 6th tote.
All right, everyone, let me just turn the camera around and I will show you what I've just done. All right, just a moment. Probably can get a few more shovelfuls in this one, since Landon's going to be the one emptying this.
This is now an all or nothing harvest. I have to get all these worms and castings out of Gilligan today.
So here's my first tote of material sitting on my patio table, all ready for me to sort the worms and cocoons. Here's the second tote of material, waiting for Landon to carry it because it's far too heavy for me. That's a bit of egg carton there. And for me to sort the cocoons and the worms. And right next to it over there is the final tote. That's what's remaining in Gilligan. So I'm going to have to get Landon's help out here because there are worms in there and they need to come out today. All right, everyone, Gilligan is emptied and ready to be moved to his summer holiday spot.